When my neighbor whispered those words, my whole body froze. I didn't know whether to run, scream, or burst into that house and demand answers. My husband had never acted strange before. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. But something inside me told me that whatever was happening behind that door wasn't just a family visit. But before I continue, I want to get to know you too. Write the flag colors of the country you're watching from, and I'll try to guess. Who knows? Maybe we're neighbors. Everything began 4 days ago. I was preparing dinner when Maurice came home pale, talking on the phone. I turned off the stove and approached, concerned by his expression. Yes, I understand. I'll be there as soon as possible. He hung up and looked at me with eyes filled with worry. My mother is sick, very sick. I need to go to her house right now. Ms. Dolores lived in a small town, a charming southern community, about 3 hours away. Like those picturesque places you see in movies. She was a strong woman, rarely got sick, which made the news even more alarming. What's wrong with her? Is it serious? I asked, already thinking about what we'd need to pack. I don't know exactly. The family doctor called. Said she has a high fever and is delirious. Could be pneumonia. Maurice was already pulling a suitcase from the closet. You stay here with Trey. We don't know what she has. It might be contagious. I don't want to risk exposing you both. I agreed reluctantly. Ms. Dolores and I had always had a close relationship, different from most daughters-in-law with their mothers-in-law. She welcomed me like a daughter from day one, and the idea of not being there to help her bothered me. Call when you get there, please, and keep me updated on her condition. Maurice nodded distractedly as he threw some clothes in the suitcase. 20 minutes later, he kissed my forehead and Trey's head, who was watching cartoons in the living room, and left. Within a few hours, I packed a small suitcase with clothes for 2 or 3 days, Trey's medicines, some toys, and snacks for the trip. Before leaving, I hesitated for a moment and tried calling Maurice one more time. Voicemail again. I sent him a message saying we missed him and were worried. In my thoughts, oscillating between worry about Ms. Dolores and a strange feeling I couldn't name. Maurice had been distant in recent weeks, more reserved, working late. At the time, I attributed it to work stress. He was a financial manager at an investment firm and frequently talked about the pressure of handling clients' money. But now, driving down the highway with only the low sound of the radio and Trey's soft breathing in the back seat, I began to review small details, moments that seemed insignificant in isolation, but together formed a disturbing pattern. Phone calls he answered on the patio away from my ears, a new lock on his desk drawer at home, more frequent business trips, small lies about where he'd been or who he'd been with. I shook my head, trying to push away those thoughts. I was being paranoid. Maurice was a good husband, a loving father. If he was hiding something, it was probably some surprise for me or a work concern he didn't want to share to avoid worrying me. When we finally arrived at the quiet town where Ms. Dolores lived, the sun was beginning to set. I navigated easily through the familiar streets to the yellow house with blue shutters where my mother-in-law had lived since retiring as a teacher. I immediately noticed something strange. All the windows were closed, with the curtains drawn. Something unusual for Ms. Dolores, who loved natural light and fresh air. Maurice's car was parked out front, which brought me some relief. At least he was there, as he'd said. I parked behind his car and turned off the engine. "Are we here, Mommy?" asked my son, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Yes, honey. We're at Grandma's house, but she might be sleeping, so we have to be very quiet, okay?" Trey nodded, unbuckling his seatbelt. We got out of the car, and while I was getting our suitcase from the trunk, I observed the house more carefully. It was strangely quiet. No movement, no light visible through the cracks in the curtains. If Miss Dolores was sick and Maurice was caring for her, shouldn't there be some sign of activity? Come on, Mommy. Trey was already running toward the gate, eager to see his grandmother. I closed the trunk and followed my son. We were almost at the gate when I noticed movement across the street. A woman hurried out of one of the neighboring houses, frantically waving at me. Brianna! Brianna, wait! She called in a low, urgent voice. I recognized her as Ms. Harriet, Ms. Dolores's lifelong neighbor, a kind lady who always offered us orange bread when we visited. Now, however, her face was pale, almost gray, and her entire body was visibly trembling as she crossed the street towards us. Trey, wait here a moment. Mommy needs to talk to Ms. Harriet. My son stopped, intrigued by the serious expression on my face. Ms. Harriet reached me, gasping as if she'd run miles instead of just crossing the street. Don't go in, she whispered, grabbing my arm with surprising strength for a woman her age. Her eyes were wide, frightened. Something very bad is happening in that house.
What do you mean, Miss Harriet? Miss Dolores is sick. My husband is taking care of her. No, she shook her head frantically. Dolores isn't here. She traveled to visit her sister in Atlanta. She left 5 days ago. My heart raced. Atlanta? There must be some mistake. Maurice told me she was sick, with a high fever, maybe pneumonia. Miss Harriet, I gripped her arm tighter. I'm telling you, Dolores is not in that house, and something very strange is happening. Your husband arrived the day before yesterday with another woman. It was as if the world had stopped for an instant. Another woman. Maurice. The information simply didn't make sense. It didn't fit with the reality I knew. It must be some nurse, I suggested weakly, or a doctor, maybe. Miss Harriet shook her head. It wasn't a healthcare professional, Brianna, and they didn't seem friendly. He dragged her inside the house. She looked scared. Before I could process what I was hearing, the sound of sirens broke the silence of the quiet afternoon. 2 patrol cars appeared around the corner, approaching quickly. Mommy, the police! Trey exclaimed, running to grab my legs, frightened by the noise he didn't understand. The patrol cars stopped abruptly in front of the house, and 4 officers got out, 2 of them with their hands on their weapons at their waists. The officer who seemed to be in charge, a tall man with a gray mustache, headed quickly to the gate. Ma'am, please step away from the house, he ordered with a firm but not hostile voice. I need you to take the child to a safe place. But this is my mother-in-law's house, I stammered, confused and scared. My husband is inside. The officer exchanged a significant look with his colleagues. What's your husband's name, ma'am? Maurice Henderson. What's happening? Why is the police here? The officer gestured to 2 of his colleagues who immediately positioned themselves at the sides of the house. Then he addressed me with a softer tone. Mrs. Henderson, I'm Detective Coleman. We need you and your son to step back for safety reasons. You could wait at Miss Harriet's house. We'll need to talk afterward. Miss Harriet immediately took my shoulder. Come, Brianna, let's go to my house. Trey can have some hot chocolate while we wait. As in a dream, or rather a nightmare, I let myself be guided across the street carrying Trey. He clung to my neck, scared by the situation he didn't understand. From Miss Harriet's porch, we watched the officers surround the house. Detective Coleman spoke something through a megaphone that I couldn't make out completely. There was a moment of tense silence. Then, with a quick and coordinated movement, 2 officers forced the front door. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the silent street, making Trey tighten his grip around my neck even more. The officers entered quickly, with weapons in hand. What's happening, Miss Harriet? I asked with a trembling voice. The lady sighed heavily, guiding me inside her house. Last night,
I heard screams coming from Dolores's house. Terrible screams from a woman.
She visibly shuddered. Then glass breaking, and then silence. I felt my blood freeze. "And you didn't call the police yesterday?" "I was afraid," she admitted shamefully. "We live in a small town, Brianna. We're not used to violence. I thought maybe it was just a fight, but then, very early this morning, I saw your husband carrying something to the trunk of his car. Something big, heavy. It looked like a very large suitcase." My mind refused to process what she was implying. Maurice. My Maurice. The man who gently shooed spiders out of the bathroom for me because he knew I was afraid of them. The man who sang lullabies to Tree even when he was exhausted from work. It wasn't possible. "He drove away," Miss Harriet continued, "and came back an hour later without the suitcase. That's when I decided to call the police. I told them everything I saw. They asked me to stay home and let them know if I saw him again." I sat heavily on Miss Harriet's couch, feeling like the world around me was crumbling. Nothing made sense. Why would Maurice lie about his mother? Who was the woman Miss Harriet had seen? And most disturbing of all, what was in that heavy suitcase? My thoughts were interrupted by firm knocks on the door. Miss Harriet went to answer, and a moment later, Detective Coleman entered the living room. His face was serious, but there was something in his eyes, compassion, perhaps, that made my stomach sink even further. "Mrs. Henderson," he began, sitting on the couch across from me. "We need to talk. It's about your husband." Detective Coleman removed his hat and placed it on the coffee table, a gesture that seemed old-fashioned, but brought with it a certain solemnity. His eyes, tired but kind, met mine. "Mrs. Henderson, what I'm going to tell you is difficult, but I need you to stay calm, especially for your son." I nodded mechanically, my body numb with anxiety. "Your husband is not in the house. The house is empty." "Empty?" I repeated, confused. "But his car is outside." "Yes, the car is there, but the house was completely searched. There's no one inside." I tried to process that information. If Maurice wasn't there, where could he be? And why would he leave the car? "Detective, I don't understand. My husband told me my mother-in-law was sick, that he came to take care of her. But Miss Harriet says my mother-in-law is in Atlanta." "Yes, we confirmed that. We contacted Miss Dolores's sister in Atlanta. Your mother-in-law is there visiting. She left 5 days ago." 5 days? Even before Maurice told me she was sick. But then, why would my husband tell me she was sick? The detective sighed, a sound heavy that seemed to carry the weight of many unpleasant truths he'd had to communicate over the years. "Mrs. Henderson, there's more. We found disturbing evidence in the house." "I'd like you to come with me to take a look, but..." He looked meaningfully toward the kitchen where Trey was still sitting. "I'll stay with the child," Miss Harriet immediately offered. "He can watch a cartoon on television while you two talk." After settling Trey in front of the television with his cookies and hot chocolate, I followed the detective outside. The street was now filled with curious onlookers, kept at a respectful distance by 2 officers. Another officer was taking photos of Maurice's car. "We're examining the vehicle," the detective explained, "looking for evidence." Evidence of what? I wanted to ask, but something prevented me. Maybe the fear of the answer. When we entered the house, I was immediately hit by a strong chemical smell, like cleaning products mixed with something metallic I couldn't identify. The living room, which had always been a cozy and orderly space, reflecting Miss Dolores's meticulous personality, was in disarray. The couch had been moved,
Cushions were scattered across the floor, and a ceramic vase that my mother-in-law adored was broken in a corner. "What happened here?" I whispered, looking around with growing horror. "We believe there was a struggle," the detective replied. "According to Miss Harriet's account, a woman was seen entering this house with your husband the day before yesterday, and last night screams and sounds of objects breaking were heard." I took a few steps toward the center of the room, feeling my legs tremble. My eyes were drawn to a dark stain on the wooden floor, a stain that someone had tried to clean, but not completely. "Is that blood?" I asked, my voice almost inaudible. The detective nodded gravely. "Yes, and there's more in the guest room over here." I followed him down the familiar hallway to the small room where Trey always slept when we visited. The door was ajar, and an officer was crouched near the bed, examining something on the floor with a flashlight. Unlike the living room, the bedroom was impeccably clean, the bed made to perfection, the floor visibly spotless, every surface polished. It was an unnatural cleanliness, almost obsessive. "Do you notice how this room is different from the rest of the house?" the detective asked. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my back. "It was cleaned recently, very thoroughly cleaned, but not completely." He pointed to the officer with the flashlight. "We're using ultraviolet light. It reveals traces of blood that aren't visible to the naked eye." The officer turned on the special light, and before my horrified eyes, the apparently clean floor revealed ghostly stains, a spatter pattern that someone had desperately tried to erase. "There's more in the bathroom," the detective continued. "Someone tried to clean up a considerable amount of blood." My mind refused to accept what I was seeing, what I was hearing. This couldn't be my husband, the father of my child. There had to be some mistake, some explanation. "Detective," I began, my voice trembling, "there must be an error. Maurice, he would never." "Mrs. Henderson," he interrupted me gently, "there's something else you need to know. Your husband has been under investigation for months." "Investigation? Why?" "For financial fraud. Maurice Henderson and his partner, Kiara Williams, are suspects in operating a pyramid scheme through the investment firm where he works. We're talking about millions of dollars diverted from investors." Fraud. Millions. I felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. "No," I shook my head. "Maurice is a financial manager, yes, but he's honest. He's always been honest. We live modestly. We don't have luxuries." "The diverted funds didn't go to lavish personal expenses," the detective explained. "They were transferred to offshore accounts. We suspect your husband and Miss Williams were planning to flee the country with the money." Miss Williams, the woman Miss Harriet saw. I remembered what she had said, that the woman looked scared, that Maurice dragged her inside the house. "And that woman," I asked shakily, "is the person whose blood is on the floor." The detective exchanged glances with the officer who continued examining the room. "That's what we suspect, yes. The amount of blood is consistent with a serious injury, possibly fatal." Fatal. The word resonated in my head like a gunshot. "And you believe Maurice?" I couldn't finish the sentence. It was too absurd, too terrible. "Mrs. Henderson." The detective put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "There's something else you should know. We found a journal under the bed. It apparently belongs to Kiara Williams. The last entry is from yesterday. In it, she writes about having discovered that your husband planned to betray her, keep all the money. She confronted him, and he became violent." Violent. A word I never associated with Maurice. In 7 years of marriage, I never saw him lose control. I never saw him raise his voice, much less his hand. How could this be the same man? I staggered to the edge of the bed and sat down, unable to stay standing any longer. My head was spinning with the amount of information, each piece more devastating than the last. And the suitcase? I asked almost involuntarily, remembering Miss Harriet's account. The detective hesitated, as if weighing how much he should tell me.
We're looking for it. Your husband was seen leaving with the suitcase this morning, driving out of town. He returned without it an hour later. We have teams tracking the region, especially isolated areas like hills or reservoirs. A chill ran through my body as I understood the implication. They were looking for a body. Kiara Williams' body. At that moment, the officer in the room stood up abruptly. "Detective, we found something." He was holding a small, shiny object with tweezers. It was a delicate gold ankle bracelet with small blue stones. I'd never seen it before. "It's not mine," I said, automatically, "and it's not Ms. Dolores's either." "It probably belongs to Kiara Williams," the detective nodded, gesturing for the officer to store the evidence in a plastic bag. My phone suddenly rang, making me jump. I pulled it from my pocket with trembling hands. An international number appeared on the screen. "It might be my mother-in-law," I said, showing the phone to the detective. He nodded. "Answer it and put it on speaker, please." With my heart racing, I answered. "Hello? Brianna. Brianna, thank God." Miss Dolores's voice sounded distant but clearly agitated. "Are you okay? And Trey? Where are you?" "We're fine, Miss Dolores," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. We're at your house, actually." There was a moment of confused silence on the other end of the line. "At my house? How, Brianna? I'm in Atlanta, at my sister's house." "I know," I responded, feeling tears finally begin to fall. "Maurice told me you were sick, that he came to take care of you." "Sick? Me? No, Brianna, I'm perfectly fine. Maurice called me this morning, desperate. He told me," her voice failed. "He told me that you and Trey had been kidnapped. He said he needed money for the ransom, that I should transfer all my savings to an account he gave me." Kidnapped. The lie was becoming more elaborate, more terrible. The detective gently took the phone from my hand. "Ms. Dolores, this is Detective Coleman from the County Sheriff's Department. Your daughter-in-law and grandson are safe with us. There has been no kidnapping. Your son lied to you." "My God," Miss Dolores moaned. "What's happening? Where is Maurice?" "That's what we're trying to find out, ma'am. Please don't transfer any money to the account your son indicated. We're in the middle of an investigation that may involve serious crimes." After some assurances that Trey and I were really okay and the promise to keep her informed, the detective ended the call. I sat in silence on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything. My husband, the man I loved, the father of my child, was a criminal, a fraudster, and possibly a murderer. "What happens now?" I finally asked, my voice sounding strangely empty, even to myself. "Now," the detective replied, "we need to find your husband before he tries to flee again. And for that, Mrs. Henderson, we need your help. What makes me happiest is having you here with me in these stories. Every like or subscribe makes me feel that we're growing together." Miss Harriet's living room had been transformed into an improvised police command center. Maps were spread across the coffee table, radios transmitted coded messages, and officers constantly entered and left, always with serious expressions. Trey was sleeping in the guest room, exhausted by the day's stress and confusion. Sitting on the couch with an untouched cup of tea in front of me, I listened to Detective Coleman explain the plan. "We have reasons to believe your husband will return," he said, marking a point on the town map. "He left the car at his mother's house, probably to avoid raising suspicion,
And now that he asked Miss Dolores for money, he'll want to know if she made the transfer. And you want to use that as bait? I stated, feeling a strange detachment, as if I were talking about a stranger, not my child's father. Exactly, the detective confirmed. Miss Dolores will call him saying the bank is putting up difficulties for the international transfer, that they demand a representative make the withdrawal personally here in America. And do you think he'll believe it? Desperate people believe what they want to believe, and your husband must be very desperate now. The thought that Maurice, my Maurice, could be described as desperate was surreal. In our life together, he had always been the definition of calm and stability. When Trey was born prematurely and spent 2 weeks in neonatal intensive care, it was Maurice who kept his composure, who consoled me when I broke down. How could this be the same man now fleeing from police, possibly with blood on his hands? And where would this trap be set? I asked, forcing myself to return to the present, to focus on the plan. The detective pointed to another spot on the map, outside the town limits. Here, the old abandoned whiskey distillery. It's isolated enough for him to feel safe, but also gives us space to position teams around without being detected. I studied the map, trying to visualize the operation. The abandoned distillery was about 5 kilometers from town, on the highway that led to the state capital. It was a strategic point, far enough away to seem discreet, but not so isolated as to raise suspicions.
And what would my role be in all this? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The detective exchanged glances with one of the officers before responding. Mrs. Henderson, I won't lie to you. Your presence could be a crucial element. If your husband sees you, that could disarm him, make him lower his guard. You want me to be the bait, I translated directly. We won't put you in danger, he assured quickly. You would stay in an observation van at a safe distance. You would only appear after the capture, when he's already contained. I thought about Trey, sleeping innocently in the next room, unaware that his world was about to crumble. I thought about Miss Dolores, who had welcomed me like a daughter, now facing the terrible revelation about the son she had raised. And I thought about Kiara Williams, a woman I never knew, but whose blood stained the floor of my mother-in-law's house. I'll do it, I decided, my voice surprisingly firm. But with one condition: Trey stays here with Miss Harriet. He can't see any of this. The detective nodded with relief. Of course, we'd already considered that. We'll leave 2 officers here for his protection as well. The following hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Miss Harriet prepared a room for Trey, where he slept peacefully, oblivious to the chaos that had engulfed our world. I watched him for a few minutes before leaving, his little face relaxed in sleep, his small fingers gripping the stuffed rabbit he'd brought from home. How would I explain that his father, his hero, was a criminal? How would I protect his heart from the pain that would surely come? In the living room, Detective Coleman was talking on the phone with Miss Dolores, giving her precise instructions about what she should tell Maurice. She would call, say she was facing difficulties with the international transfer, that the bank demanded a local representative to authorize the withdrawal. Do you understand, Miss Dolores? It's crucial that it seems natural, that he believes you're really trying to help him get the ransom money. On the other end of the line, I heard my mother-in-law's trembling voice. Even at a distance, even after discovering her son's lies, she was still the strong woman I admired. I understand perfectly, Detective. I'll do my part for Brianna and my grandson. When he hung up, the detective turned to me. She'll call him in 15 minutes. If he takes the bait, we'll have about an hour to position ourselves at the abandoned distillery. I nodded mechanically, still trying to process everything that was happening. Part of me was still hoping to wake up at any moment, to discover this was all just a terrible nightmare. But the weight of the phone in my hand, the
The smell of coffee coming from Miss Harriet's kitchen, the constant murmur of police radios, everything was too real. "What if he doesn't show up?" I asked suddenly. The detective exchanged glances with one of the officers before responding. "Then we'll keep looking. We have teams tracking the entire region, checking roads, hotels, inns. He won't go far, Mrs. Henderson, especially if he thinks he can get his mother's money." 15 minutes later, the detective's phone rang. It was Miss Dolores, ready to make the call to Maurice. Everyone in the room fell silent as the detective put the call on speaker. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. When I thought it would go to voicemail, my husband's familiar voice sounded on the other end of the line. "Mother, did you get the money?" It was Maurice's voice, but at the same time, it wasn't. There was a coldness, a hardness I'd never perceived before. Or maybe it had always been there and I simply didn't want to see it. "Maurice, son." Miss Dolores's voice genuinely trembled. She didn't need to fake the desperation. "I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can. I went to the bank here in Atlanta, but they told me a transfer of that amount to an unknown account would raise suspicions, that they'd need special authorization." "We don't have time for bureaucracy, Mother," Maurice interrupted, his voice tense. "They gave a deadline. If I don't deliver the money." "I know, son, I know. That's why the bank manager suggested another solution. They have a representative in our area, in our town. He can authorize the withdrawal directly, without all that bureaucracy. He'll be there with the cash." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost see Maurice weighing, evaluating the risks. Finally, he spoke. "Where would this meeting be?" "At the old whiskey distillery, at the end of the main road. The manager said it's a discreet place where no one would see the transaction." Another silence, longer this time. "When?" he finally asked. "This afternoon at 5 o'clock. He'll be alone with a black briefcase. You need to go alone too, Maurice. He was very clear about that." "And the money will all be there? Everything I asked for?" "Yes, son, all of my retirement money. A lifetime of savings, but it's worth it if that brings Brianna and Trey back safely." The mention of our names made my stomach churn. How could he use the people he supposedly loved as pawns in such a sordid game? "Agreed," Maurice said after a pause. "I'll meet him. But if this is a trap, Mother, if something goes wrong—" "It's not a trap, son. It's your mother trying to help. Please bring my grandson and daughter-in-law back safely." The call ended. Everyone in the room released the breath they had unconsciously held. "He took the bait," the detective Coleman announced, already standing and signaling to the other officers. "Let's get ready." The next hour was a blur of activity. Disguised police cars left at strategic intervals to avoid raising suspicion. Bulletproof vests were distributed, radios were checked. An officer was selected for the role of bank representative, a middle-aged man with a trustworthy appearance who would be positioned in the center of what had once been the main lobby of the distillery, a black briefcase beside him. Before leaving, I went to the room where Trey was sleeping and kissed his forehead. "Mommy will be back soon," I whispered. "I love you more than anything." Miss Harriet was at the room's door, watching. "He'll be fine," she assured me, putting a kind hand on my shoulder. "I'll take care of him like he's my own grandson." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you for everything, Miss Harriet. Go, she said firmly. Do what you have to do. Afterward, we'll rebuild life. The sun was beginning to set when we arrived at the outskirts of the abandoned distillery. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, a beauty that cruelly contrasted with the darkness of the situation. The old whiskey distillery, closed more than a decade ago, stood like an industrial ghost against the horizon. Faded concrete walls, broken windows, a rusty gate hanging from hinges that seemed about to give way. I was positioned in an observation van parked about 200 meters from the distillery, hidden by a row of trees and bushes. Inside the van, monitors showed images from cameras strategically positioned around and inside the distillery. The officer disguised as a bank representative was already in position in the center of what had once been the main lobby of the distillery, a black briefcase beside him. "He'll come soon," Detective Coleman murmured, sitting next to me in the van. "Stay calm, Mrs. Henderson. Everything will be fine." I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that after this terrible day, I could begin to rebuild some kind of life for Trey and myself. But how do you rebuild on ruins so deep? "Movement," one of the officers in the van announced, pointing to one of the monitors. My heart raced when I saw a solitary figure cautiously approaching through the side entrance of the distillery. Even in the grainy images from the security cameras, even with the motorcycle helmet covering his face, I would recognize Maurice anywhere. The man I loved, the man who had betrayed not only me, but himself, everything I believed he was. He moved like a predator, cautious, calculating. He stopped at a safe distance from the disguised officer, his right hand hidden inside his jacket. "He's armed," Detective Coleman murmured, bringing the radio to his lips. "Teams in position. Suspect is armed." The disguised officer gestured toward the briefcase, trying to lure Maurice closer. "Are you from the bank?" Maurice asked, his voice muffled by the helmet. "Yes, sir," the officer replied calmly. "I have the money here, as agreed with your mother." Maurice took a step forward, then stopped, still distrustful. "Show me the money first." The officer crouched and began to open the briefcase. That's when Detective Coleman gave the signal. "Now," he ordered through the radio. In seconds, powerful lights came on from all sides, flooding the abandoned distillery. Officers emerged from their hiding places, weapons pointed. "Police, freeze, hands on your head." The shouts echoed through the concrete walls. Maurice froze for an instant. Then, with a quick movement, he pulled a weapon from inside his jacket and fired into the air. "Stay back," he shouted, backing toward the exit. "Stay back." "No," I whispered, horrified to see my husband, my child's father, transformed into this desperate and dangerous stranger. Maurice tried to run, but he was already surrounded. One of the officers fired, hitting the tire of the motorcycle parked at the entrance. The sound of the shot echoed through the abandoned distillery, followed by the tire's explosion. Destabilized, Maurice stumbled and fell heavily to the ground. The weapon escaped from his hand, sliding across the dirty concrete. In seconds, 3 officers immobilized him, forcing his arms behind his back and handcuffing him. "Maurice Henderson, you are under arrest for fraud, attempted murder, extortion, and illegal weapon possession," one of the officers announced as he removed the helmet from Maurice's head. For the first time in days, I saw the face of the man who had shared my bed, my life. There was no longer a mask of kindness, of stability. His eyes were wild, furious, his jaw tense in an expression I'd never seen before. "We'll take him to the station," Detective Coleman said, standing and signaling to the van's driver. Do you want to see him now, or would you prefer to wait until we're at the station? I hesitated for only a moment. Now, I decided. I need to look him in the eyes. I need to understand if there's anything to understand. The detective nodded. Let's go then. When the van stopped a few meters from where Maurice was being lifted from the ground by the officers, I felt a wave of contradictory emotions: rage, sadness, confusion, even a painful remnant of love. This man had been my world for 7 years, the dedicated father of my child, or so I believed. I got out of the van slowly, my legs trembling. Maurice, now standing, flanked by officers firmly gripping his arms, turned his head toward the sound of the door opening. When he saw me, his eyes widened in shock. "Brianna," he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and confusion. What are you doing here?" I approached cautiously, stopping a few meters away. I observed his face, searching for any trace of the man I thought I knew. I found nothing. "Hello, Maurice," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "Surprise, isn't it? Trey and I came to visit your sick mother." Understanding slowly replaced the confusion on his face. His eyes narrowed, calculating. "Brianna, dear, this is a misunderstanding," he tried, his voice suddenly soft, persuasive, the same voice he used to convince Trey to eat vegetables, to calm me after a difficult day. "I can explain everything. I'm working on a secret operation, trying to catch criminals inside the company. I had to lie to protect you, to protect Trey." It was such a transparent lie, so desperate that I almost laughed. Almost. "Enough lies, Maurice," I said, keeping my voice low, conscious of the officers around us. "I know about the fraud. I know about Kiara Williams. I saw the blood on the floor of your mother's house." The change in his face was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask of concern crumbled, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You don't know anything," he hissed. "I know enough. I know you lied to me for years. I know you used mine and Trey's names to try to extort your own mother. I know that—" My voice failed for a moment. "I know you might have killed a woman and hidden her body." Maurice didn't deny it. He showed no remorse. Instead, he looked at me with a coldness that made me shiver. "You were always so naive, Brianna. So easy to fool. Yes, honey, I'm working late. Sure, love, it's just a business trip." And you believed it all without questioning, without doubting. Each word was like a stab, but I maintained my posture. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. "You're right, Maurice. I was naive. I believed in you because I loved you, because I trusted you. My only crime was believing the man I married was who he said he was." Before Maurice could respond, a commotion arose at the distillery entrance. Officers were running toward a figure stumbling inside, a woman with torn and dirty clothes, one arm wrapped in a bloody rag. "Detective!" one of the officers shouted. "We found her on the road trying to get here." The woman lifted her face, revealing bruises and cuts, but eyes that burned with determination. She was young, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair that must have once been elegant, now tangled and dirty. "Kiara," Detective Coleman whispered beside me. Kiara Williams was alive. The effect on Maurice was immediate and violent. He struggled against the officers holding him, his face contorted with fury. "You!" he screamed. "How is that possible? You should be dead." The officers contained him with difficulty, while others ran to help Kiara, who seemed about to faint. One offered water, another called for an ambulance on the radio. "You failed again, Maurice," Kiara said weakly, but with surprising hardness. like always. Detective Coleman gently guided me back to the van, away from the chaotic scene. Let's go to the station, Mrs. Henderson. There, we can better understand what happened. Before the van door closed, I looked one last time at the man who had been my husband. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Rage, perhaps, or something colder and more calculating. This stranger, I realized, with a chill, had slept beside me for 7 years, had held our newborn son, and promised to love me until death do us part. And throughout all that time, I never truly knew him. The police station was an old building in the town center, with peeling walls and worn furniture that had seen better days. Sitting in an uncomfortable chair in Detective Coleman's office, with a cup of bad coffee cooling in front of me, I waited for Kiara Williams to be brought in after receiving first aid from paramedics. She refused to go to the hospital until talking to us, the detective explained, entering the room after checking the situation. The injuries are serious but don't appear to be fatal. She's a strong woman. I nodded silently, still trying to process everything. Kiara Williams, the woman I had automatically hated hours ago, the other woman in my husband's life. Now I felt only a strange connection with her, both victims of the same man, though in different ways. And Maurice? I asked. He's in the interrogation room. He asked for a lawyer, which is his right. But with the evidence we have, plus Miss Williams' testimony, there isn't much room for defense. The door opened, and 2 officers entered, escorting Kiara. She looked better than at the distillery. Her face had been cleaned, revealing bruises in various stages of healing, and her arm was now properly bandaged. But it was her eyes that caught attention, dark, intense, with a determination that seemed to overcome physical pain. Detective Coleman cleared his throat, turning on a recorder on the table. Miss Williams, if you feel well enough, I'd like you to tell us exactly what happened at Miss Dolores Henderson's house. Kiara took a deep breath, glancing quickly at me before beginning her story. I met Maurice 3 years ago at the investment firm where he worked. I was a financial consultant specializing in attracting new investors. She paused, moistening her dry lips. At first, it was just a professional relationship. Maurice had brilliant ideas. He knew how to make money work. I had the contacts, the ability to gain clients' trust. When did you start defrauding investors? Detective Coleman asked. Kiara lowered her gaze for a moment. It started small, a diversion here, another there. Then it kept growing. Maurice was convincing. He said clients wouldn't even notice, that it was money they'd never miss. While she spoke, I tried to reconcile that image with the Maurice I knew, the man who questioned whether we should really accept the incorrect change a cashier had given us, the man who regularly donated to our son's school coat drive. In the last year, things started getting complicated. Some clients began asking questions, demanding detailed statements. We realized it was only a matter of time before everything came to light. And that's when you decided to flee, Detective Coleman completed. Yes, Maurice suggested we leave the country, start a new life abroad. We had transferred most of the money to offshore accounts. Everything was ready. She stopped, her eyes fixing on me. He told me he was single, that he had no family. I only found out about you and your son later, after it was already too late. I felt a knot in my throat. Maurice hadn't just lied to me, but to her as well. We were both pieces in his elaborate game. What happened at his mother's house? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Kiara closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When things started getting dangerous in the city, Maurice suggested we hide at his mother's house. He said she was traveling, that the house would be empty. He said we'd stay there for a few days until we got the final documents to leave the country. She lightly touched the bandage on her arm before continuing. The first night, everything seemed normal. Maurice was tense, but I attributed it to the situation. The second night, while he was showering, I took his phone to check some transfers we had made. That's when I saw everything. "What did you see?" Detective Coleman asked. "Messages to a contact in Miami, arranging a single plane ticket, not two, just one, in Maurice's name, and transfers. All our joint accounts had been emptied. The money moved to an account only he had access to." Her eyes met mine. "There were also messages to you and photos of your son." I felt my heart clench. Even while planning to abandon his family, Maurice maintained that facade, that double life. When I confronted him, Kiara continued, her voice now lower. He transformed. I had never seen him like that before. His eyes were a stranger's eyes, cold, calculating. She took a deep breath. He grabbed my cologne bottle from the dresser and hit me in the head. I fell. He started strangling me, saying I was a problem, that I knew too much, that I talked too much, that no one would miss me. "How did you survive?" I asked, horrified by the violence of the man who had shared my bed. "I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was alone, covered in blood. I managed to crawl out of the house to the tool shed in the back. I spent the night there, going in and out of consciousness. The next morning, I saw Maurice loading a large suitcase into the car. I thought maybe he was going to put me in there." She visibly shuddered. "When he left, I tried to call for help, but I was too weak. I spent the day hiding, trying to regain strength. That's when I heard the sirens. I saw the police." Detective Coleman asked several more questions. Details about the fraud, about the escape plan. Kiara answered everything with surprising clarity for someone who had been through such an ordeal. When she finished her account, she seemed exhausted, but somehow also lighter, as if sharing the truth had removed a weight from her shoulders. "There's one more thing," she said, reaching into the pocket of her torn pants. She withdrew a small USB device. "All the evidence is here. Records of the frauds, names of affected clients, details of offshore accounts. I always kept backups of everything. Maurice thought I trusted him blindly." An ironic smile touched her lips. "That was his mistake." Detective Coleman took the device carefully, placing it in an evidence envelope. "This will be extremely useful for the case, Miss Williams. Now we really need to get you to the hospital to properly care for those injuries." As the officers helped Kiara stand, she stopped and looked at me one last time. "I'm sorry," she said simply, "for everything. I didn't know about you, about your son. If I had known—" "It's not your fault," I replied, and I realized it was true. The blame was entirely Maurice's. When Kiara left, escorted by officers, Detective Coleman turned to me. "You should rest too. It's been a difficult day. We can continue this tomorrow." Before that, I said, one crucial question still weighing on my mind. What was in the large suitcase Maurice loaded into the car if it wasn't Kiara? The detective sighed. "We still don't know for certain. Teams are tracking the region where he was seen stopping the car. But if I had to guess, I'd say it was evidence of the fraud, incriminating documents, maybe even cash, something he didn't want us to find in the house." I nodded, a strange relief washing over me. At least Maurice wasn't a murderer, despite having tried to become one. "Can I see him?" I asked suddenly. "Before I leave, I need to look him in the eyes one last time." The detective hesitated. He already asked for a lawyer. Technically, we shouldn't allow visits at this time. "Please," I insisted. Not as a visitor, as a wife. I promise not to interfere with the case, not to ask questions about the investigation. I just need this closure. After a moment of consideration, the detective nodded. 5 minutes, and an officer will stay present the entire time. The interrogation room was small and devoid of personality. A metal table, 2 chairs, gray walls. Maurice was sitting on one side of the table, hands cuffed in front of him. When I entered, he raised his eyes, and, for a fleeting instant, I saw a flash of something in his gaze. Surprise, maybe even shame, but it was quickly replaced by the mask of indifference he now wore. I sat across from him, aware of the officer standing by the door and the camera in the corner of the room. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. This man, who had once been the center of my world, now seemed like a stranger. "Why?" I asked, the only word I could form.
Maurice tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. Why what, exactly? Why the fraud? Why Kiara? Why lie to you? All of it. Anything. I just want to understand. He sighed, a sound that seemed almost genuine in its weariness. You wouldn't understand, Brianna. You'd never understand what it's like to feel trapped, limited, to look at the future and see only mediocrity, a mediocre job, a mediocre house, a mediocre life. Our life wasn't mediocre, I replied, feeling a stab of anger for the first time. We had a home, a child, love. What more could you want? A cold smile touched his lips. More. Always more. You were never ambitious, Brianna. You settled for so little. I wanted more from life. More money, more power, more freedom. And you were willing to destroy everything to get that? Including your own son? The mention of Trey seemed to affect him in a way my other words hadn't. For a moment, his mask fell, revealing something that seemed almost like genuine regret. Trey never suffered, he said, lowering his voice. I always loved him, in my way. In your way? I repeated, incredulous. Your way included using your son as a pawn in a scheme to extort your own mother? What kind of love is that, Maurice? He didn't answer, his eyes drifting to the table between us. And us? I asked, my voice softer now. Did you love me in your way too? Maurice raised his gaze, meeting mine. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of the man I had known, the man who had made me laugh on our first date, who had held my hand during labor, who had danced with me in the kitchen on wedding anniversaries. Yes, he said finally, but it wasn't enough. 3 simple words that summarized everything. It wasn't enough. Our love, our family, our life together. None of it was enough for Maurice, and never would be. I stood slowly. There was nothing more to say. Nothing more to ask. The Maurice I knew, or thought I knew, had disappeared long ago. If he had ever really existed. Goodbye, Maurice, I said simply, turning to leave. Brianna, he called when I was at the door. I stopped without turning around. Take good care of Trey. I almost laughed at the irony, as if I needed that reminder, as if it hadn't always been me taking care of our son while he lived his double life. I always did, I replied, and left without looking back. Detective Coleman was waiting for me in the hallway. Are you all right? I nodded, feeling a strange calm wash over me.
Yes, I'm ready to go back to my son now. When we returned to Miss Harriet's house, it was late evening. Trey was still sleeping, oblivious to the hurricane that had devastated our lives. I sat on the edge of the bed where he slept, watching his peaceful little face, his long eyelashes, his chest rising and falling in tranquil breaths. How would I protect this little heart from what was to come? Miss Harriet appeared in the doorway, holding a steaming cup of tea. "Thought you might need this," she said gently, handing me the cup. "Thank you," I murmured, accepting the hot tea with gratitude. "For everything." She sat beside me on the bed, looking at Trey with affection. "He's strong like his mother. He's going to get through this." How do I explain that his father will never come home again? That everything we knew was a lie? Miss Harriet sighed, a sound loaded with wisdom acquired through many years and many sorrows. "You don't explain it all at once, not to a 5-year-old. You tell him what he can understand, what he needs to know. That Daddy did something wrong and needs to be away for a while, that it has nothing to do with him, that it's not his fault. And when he grows up, when he starts asking more questions, then you tell him more as he's ready to hear it. The truth is a weight, Brianna. You don't put a weight too heavy on shoulders too small." She touched my hand softly. "But that's for tomorrow. Today you rest, regain your strength." I nodded, feeling exhaustion finally overcoming me. I finished the tea and lay down beside Trey, carefully hugging him so as not to wake him. His warmth, his familiar smell were like a balm for my shattered soul. I didn't think I'd be able to sleep, but physical and emotional exhaustion soon conquered me, taking me to a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, I woke to Trey poking my face. Mommy, wake up! Where's Grandma? We came to see Grandma, remember?" Reality came in a painful wave. For a moment, I almost wished it was all just a terrible nightmare from which I had just awakened. But the unfamiliar room, Maurice's absence, Miss Harriet's worried expression in the doorway, everything confirmed the nightmare was real. "Trey, sweetheart," I began, sitting up and pulling him into my lap. "Grandma isn't here. She's traveling, visiting Aunt Margaret in Atlanta. Do you remember her?" Trey made a face. "But Daddy said she was sick. That's why he came to take care of her." I took a deep breath. I would start now then. The small truths that would replace the big lies.
Sometimes adults make mistakes, Trey. Daddy got confused. Grandma's fine. She's traveling, but now we need to go home. And Daddy, are we going to wait for him? I exchanged glances with Miss Harriet, who nodded encouragingly. "Daddy isn't coming back with us now, honey. He needs to solve some things. He's going to be away for a while." Trey's little face contorted in confusion and sadness. "Why? Is he mad at me?" "No, my love, no." I hugged him tight, feeling tears burn in my eyes. "This has nothing to do with you. Daddy loves you very much, but he did some things wrong, and now he needs to fix that. Like when you break a toy and need to fix it. Understand?" Trey nodded slowly, though I knew he didn't fully comprehend. How could he? I myself couldn't fully understand how the man I loved had transformed into a criminal, into a stranger. After a simple breakfast, prepared by Miss Harriet, we packed our few things. Detective Coleman appeared to take us home, since my car would have to stay for the investigation. "We can stop by the station first," he suggested discreetly while Trey was distracted saying goodbye to Miss Harriet's cat. "There are some documents that need to be signed, and we need to discuss the next steps." At the station, while Trey colored pictures in the waiting room under the supervision of a kind officer, I was informed about what to expect in the coming days and weeks. "Your husband will be formally charged with financial fraud, attempted murder, extortion, and illegal weapon possession. With the evidence we have, plus Kiara Williams' testimony and the USB device with fraud records, The case is quite solid. He'll probably face a long sentence. I nodded mechanically, signing the documents presented to me. And the fraud victims? Will there be any way to recover their money? We're working on that. Part of the money may be recovered from offshore accounts, but it will take time. And, unfortunately, not everything will likely be recovered. A new wave of shame hit me. Even having not consciously participated in the fraud, I was Maurice's wife. In many people's eyes, I would be complicit, or at least negligent. You shouldn't blame yourself, the detective said, as if reading my thoughts. All evidence indicate you had no knowledge of your husband's criminal activities. You're also a victim in this story. We left the station with heavy hearts, but with a plan. We would return to our house, a house that now seemed like a stage set, a backdrop where Maurice had played his role as devoted husband and father. I would gather our documents, contact a lawyer, begin divorce proceedings. Then we would probably have to move, start over somewhere else, away from the pitying looks, the whispers, the inevitable questions. During the drive back, Trey fell asleep in the back seat of the police car. I watched the landscape pass by the window, fields and small towns that seemed to belong to another world, a parallel reality where normal families lived normal lives, without devastating secrets, without unthinkable betrayals. "Do you have family who can help you?" Detective Coleman asked as he drove. "My parents live in the South, almost 600 miles away in Georgia. I have a sister in Atlanta. I'll contact them. Tell them what happened." The idea of making those calls, of speaking out loud the terrible truths I had discovered, made my stomach churn. And Maurice's mother, Miss Dolores, she said she'll return from Atlanta as soon as she can. I'm worried about her. This is going to destroy her. She seems like a strong woman, like you. I looked at him, surprised by the comment. Strong? I don't feel strong. I feel broken. Still, you faced one of the worst possible betrayals. You discovered the man you shared your life with was a criminal, maybe even an attempted murderer. And yet, you're here, planning the next step, thinking about how to protect your son, worrying about your mother-in-law. That's strength, Mrs. Henderson. His words touched something inside me. Maybe he was right. Maybe surviving this, continuing to breathe, continuing to function was a form of strength. Not the exuberant, confident strength I had always imagined, but a quiet strength, born of necessity and love for my child. When we finally arrived at our house, it was night. The lights were off, the house silent and cold. Trey, still sleepy, clung to my neck as I carried him inside. "Thank you for everything, Detective," I said, stopping at the door. "I'll stay in touch, and remember, you're not alone in this." I nodded, grateful for the support, and entered the house, closing the door behind me. There, in the silence of our living room, looking at the family photos on the wall, smiles frozen in moments that now seemed to belong to strangers, I finally felt the complete reality of my situation. The man I loved, my child's father, was a criminal, a liar, a stranger. Our life together had been built on lies, and now I was alone, facing an uncertain future, trying to protect my son from truths I couldn't fully understand myself. But as I watched Trey fall asleep in his bed, surrounded by his favorite toys, I realized that, despite everything, there was still truth in my life. The love for my son was real. The strength I would find to move forward would be real. And maybe someday I would find peace again. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. With that silent promise, I lay down beside Trey and finally allowed the tears to come. Not just for what I had lost, but also for what I still had, for what was still mine.